This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Thank you all for being here today. And I'm glad to have Barbara join us. So, okay. Today we are talking about the different kinds of applique embroidery. And what I'm showing here on my camera is a typical applique that we think about doing. And I sent you 5 designs, and I also sent you a sheet that has the instructions for sewing out those designs, because some of these designs are exclusive to the Applique 2. So if you don't have the Applique 2, you might not have those particular designs. So I decided to go ahead and send those out to you. Okay. So that will help you, because when you're doing an applique design, you need to know when to put your fabric down, you need to know when to trim it, and so forth like that.
Judy,
Yes, Linda?
on this paper, can you say this is typical applique? What about the rest of them? Could you identify those for us, for me?
We will as we go along.
Okay.
Okay, there are, in our handout, there are 4 different kinds of applique. And I can go ahead and tell you now what they are. The 4 kinds of applique are just normal, what our handout calls covered edge applique, where you're putting down the machine is doing a placement stitch. And you're then putting down the fabric. It does a tack down stitch. You trim the fabric, and then it does a decorative stitch to cover the raw edge of the fabric. That's what our handout is calling covered edge fabric, or covered edge applique, and that is that first one, that B022. All right. The next one that our handout talks about is called Applique Raw Edge. And that design is the little pink flower down in the right-hand corner, M016. And this is what it looks like. Where you are, again, your machine is stitching out a placement line. You're putting down the fabric. It does a tack down. And this time the tack down is, I want to say, more secure, or it's a little bit heavier or maybe decorative than the normal tack down, because you're not going to cover it up. You're going to trim outside of that tack down decorative stitch. That, your tack down is your decorative stitch. You're going to trim out, a good 1/8 of an inch or so beyond that, because that's what's holding your applique in place. There is no other decorative stitch around the edge, and you are seeing the raw edge of the fabric, and that's how it's intended. Okay. Then we have what is called reverse applique covered edge, and that is the little black gray flower up in the right hand corner, B155. And that, when it's stitched out, looks like that, where and we'll go into detail on all of these, you put your fabric behind the stitching and cut away the front. So that's why it's called reverse, because your fabric is coming up from the back. All right, so that's that one. And then the last one is a swirly looking circle G038, kind of in the center and right-hand side of the page. And that one is also reversed, that the fabric is put in from behind, and you cut away not only the fabric, but you cut away the stabilizer and then replace the stabilizer behind the fabric. All right, so there's 4 different kinds of appliques that we're dealing with today. And the 5th design that I sent you, which looks super ugly on this sheet, I'm sorry, but I just borrowed pictures from the online sample book. I printed it out, and if you print it out in the software, it looks a whole lot better. That also is a reverse raw edge applique. And I just thought that was something that you might, if you wanted to try it, you might be more inclined to try the flower rather than the circle. All right, any questions about any of that information so far? Makes sense, I hope. All right, so I'm going to go back and go into, does anybody have I know Brenda somehow didn't get the information that was on the supply sheet. Did anybody else get it and make pieces of fabric and stabilizer to be able to stitch out during class? Okay, Barbara, what I do is I provide Carol a couple, 3 weeks or so ahead of time with a supply list, and she uploads it to the website so you can see what the class is going to be about, and if there's supplies that you need to stitch out your samples during class, they're listed in there also. So I will include that when I send your information today.
Okay, that's great. I think on the calendar, it said it was going to be positioning. The one that's listed today was,
well,
yeah, so anyway, I cut out what it said on the calendar, you know, even though I didn't have it, but clearly it doesn't matter because
all right, everything that when you do get this and the handouts and so forth, I think I don't know what your experience is as far as the machines and so forth, or in sewing general. But
I've done a lot, and through a lot of frustration, probably over the last 2.5+ years, I'm pretty proficient at the machine. I make a lot of mistakes, and so I think I have tended to learn from what I shouldn't be doing. But it's great just to have a collaborative effort, you know, of other people who are learning too.
Okay, well, that sounds good. And we all learn by our mistakes, and we probably learn much better when we make mistakes and figure out what we really did we shouldn't have.
Yeah.
So, all right. So looking at this one, in the handout, I hope this, you know, if this is boring for you, please tell me, but the very, you know, basic applique, like I said, is, you know, placement stitch, you put the fabric down, it tacks it down, you trim it, it covers it, or puts in extra decorative elements. Like this one, these feathers or whatever you want to call them up here at the top are stitched first, and they're just embroidery. And then it does the placement stitch for this little triangular piece, and you put it down, it you tack it down, you trim it, and then you do the decorative stitch over it. And then it does the same for this larger piece down here at the bottom. So our handout goes through great detail, step by step, and tells you what you should be doing and so forth. And I have used, I'm a big fan of tearaway stabilizer for woven fabrics. So I have used some Inspira tearaway stabilizer, which I really, really like. It's rather crisp. In fact, let me, this is what it looks like. And it tears really easily, especially if you've stitched, you know, like a satin stitch on it. It'll come away really clean. So I have used tearaway for all of the samples that I made for today. Okay. Any questions about just the ordinary applique, or any experiences you've had that were good or bad with the regular applique? Okay. All right, so moving on to the Raw Edge applique. Like I said before, that's it's similar to the regular applique, except that you do not cover your raw edge, and you don't try to trim really close to your tack down decorative stitch on that fabric, because if you had trimmed that really, really close, you'd run the risk of that fabric pulling out from under those stitches. So you want to leave enough fabric that your stitches won't pull out. That makes sense? When you're doing a regular applique, you want to trim as close as you can to your tack down stitches. But on a raw edge, you don't want to do that. In fact, how much fabric you leave outside of those stitches is a personal choice. There's no applique police that are going to come and say, oh, you trimmed that too close, or you've got way too much fabric on the outside.
Judy, if you're going to wash a raw edge applique, do you leave more, less? What do you do?
One thing I would do would be to back my applique fabric with a fusible web, such as Steam-a-Seam 2 or something like that, because that would, if you will, glue it down, because when you would press it, it would not only glue the inside part of the applique, it would glue that raw edge down a bit. But if you were going to wash it and you did not do that, yes, I would leave more. And when you did, it would probably fuzz up the edge a bit when you washed it. So
I like that sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes that looks good.
So when you put the Steam-a-Seam on, do you iron it after everything's done and you've cut everything away?
Well, you're going to put Steam-a-Seam on the back of your applique fabric. Say, this is my applique fabric.
Yeah.
This is the right side. On the wrong side, I would have ironed a piece of Steam-a-Seam large enough to cover my design prior to putting it down on my base fabric. So I would have the whole thing pretty much covered with Steam-a-Seam. Then when it did the placement stitch, I would put my fabric with the Steam-a-Seam down and then do the tack down stitch.
And would you ever iron the other side down?
Yes. Once I had finished and trimmed, then yeah, don't iron it down before you try to trim it, because you're
No, I wouldn't.
But yes, I would go back and I would fuse the applique to my base fabric after I had finished the embroidery.
Okay.
And most likely I would do it from the back side after I'd taken the stabilizer off.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking. Okay, any questions about that? In general, if you've done any of the regular applique and you've come across something where you maybe trimmed it just a little closer and your stitches want to pull out, you can put some fabric glue down before your satin stitch or decorative stitch comes along and let it take hold before you do that step. The other thing, sometimes even if you don't trim it too close, the decorative stitch, particularly the satin stitches, are so close together that they kind of just shred the fabric, and it pulls away from your decorative stitch. One thing I've found that really helps that is I have a bad habit of doing all my stitching with an embroidery 90 needle. Okay, so applique is in the hoop is embroidery, so I'm using an embroidery 90 needle, but I've discovered that an embroidery 75 will give you a lot less grief than a 90. Okay, because
Great to know.
it's not making as big a hole, it's not shoving the fibers as far apart as it's, putting those dense stitches in
Yeah.
on the edges. So try using a 75.
Oh, good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so that's those two kinds of applique. Now, this little flower, which is the, let's see, I put this in the wrong place. Okay. This is the reverse applique covered edge. So I guess I have done reverse applique, but I probably didn't have something like this handout to tell me how I was supposed to do it. So I was a bit surprised when it says, put your stabilizer down, put your applique fabric down, put your base fabric down, and hoop all of that, which sounds totally backwards. You've got your applique fabric underneath your base fabric with the right side facing up. So what happens is it stitches the placement stitch, and then instead of cutting, your fabric is already underneath. So what you need to do is to cut out the center of that base fabric. So you very carefully, hoping not to cut your applique fabric, trim that on the inside rather than the outside, because you want to take away this piece of your base fabric that's on top of your applique fabric. So I was not expecting it to say hoop the applique fabric. So on the supply sheet, for number 3, I've listed them 1, 2, 3, 4, just like the samples I'm going through. I put a 4x5 piece of floral color. That's not, I had to just lay it in the hoop because it wasn't big enough for the hoop to grab it. So if you want to make a note that piece should almost be as big as your piece of base fabric you're hooping. All right, and once you've trimmed it out, then it goes ahead and does its own stitching thing.
Did you say their stabilizer was in there too?
The stabilizer is behind your applique fabric. So you're just, when you cut into your base fabric, the applique fabric is the next thing. And then the stabilizer is behind everything.
Okay.
Okay. All right. And this is kind of an unusual design because these are just rows of straight stitching where it just goes back and forth to do that little pattern on there. Can you see that? I've looked at that design for a long time and never really paid any attention. I just thought it was like a pattern fill or something, but it's not. It's just rows of straight stitching back and forth and back and forth.
It's
And
pretty.
I like the design a lot.
You too.
And you could, you certainly could stitch it out as a non-applique design. But then once it's all finished, then they tell you to trim all of your applique fabric outside of the design from the back side, which, yes, because I've got white fabric here, my pink shows through. So that could be kind of a chore to go back and trim that, all of that fabric from the back side. But that's one of the things that happens with the reverse applique, that you've got extra fabric on the back that you need to get rid of. If it did not show through, if I had black fabric here for my base, then that wouldn't really matter. I wouldn't have to trim it away. But since I have white, it's something you might consider when you're thinking about doing a reverse applique design, that you don't want to if you don't want to have to deal with trimming all that stuff off the back, then you might decide to use a darker fabric for your base fabric instead of a light fabric. Is that making some kind of sense? Okay.
Right.
All right. Now, our fourth kind of applique is a reverse applique with raw edges. And this time you are not hooping your applique fabric. You're just hooping your base fabric and your stabilizer. All right. And you will do the placement stitch, and then you will put your fabric behind and the hoop. So it's going to be underneath the stabilizer. Your sandwich is going to be from the hoop, bottom of the hoop up, or from the machine hoop up. It's going to be applique fabric, stabilizer in the hoop, base fabric in the hoop. All right, your applique fabric is not hooped, but your stabilizer and your base fabric are hooped, and you have stitched out the placement line. Then you position your applique fabric underneath the hoop and do your tack down stitch. Then you come in and you trim out not only the base fabric, but you trim out your stabilizer, because it's between, at that point, it's between the applique fabric and the base fabric. So if I just cut this off, I still have my stabilizer on top of this. So I'm cutting this as well as the stabilizer to expose my applique fabric. So then, and the instructions do not tell you this, then you need to slide another, or float, what we call floating, another piece of stabilizer underneath the hoop, underneath your applique fabric to finish stitching out your design. So you might make a note, and that would be on, oh, where Brenda pointed out that we have page 6 of 6 on every page of our first part of our handout today. So it's on under reversed applique raw edge, and it's actually the last instructions. Item number 12 or 13. Make a note that you want to add an extra piece of stabilizer underneath. Also, the instructions tell you to use cutaway stabilizer, and I don't know why. Because when you cut this away and you've got this raw edge, if you're cutting your stabilizer at the same time that you're cutting your base fabric, then you're going to have stabilizer, to me, that would show underneath that raw edge. So I used tearaway stabilizer so I could tear it away instead of just cutting it away. And I could clean that stabilizer out underneath that raw edge up to the tack down stitch. Is that making sense? Okay. So also on the next to the last page, where it says number 6 says stabilize your base fabric with a hooped cutaway stabilizer. I use tearaway. It's your choice, but I don't want that stabilizer to show, which theoretically it shouldn't, but if you wash it, like, you know, normally we would wash something we've made, then your raw edge is going to fray a bit and your stabilizer could peek out from under it. So I want my stabilizer gone. All right. And then again, they tell you to trim your excess applique fabric from the back side of your base fabric. Any thing not making sense or any questions about it? Hopefully when you get your handouts, Barbara, it will make a little better sense.
It already makes sense. I have never done any of the reverse or the raw edge applique, but I've done a fair amount of just the regular standard applique. So it does make sense.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Any questions? Okay. I'm sure everybody has done, you know, a fair amount of the regular applique. That's kind of what it's easy, it's fun, it's a good embroidery experience. The project that, when we have these workbook classes, Barbara, we always have, like, there's 2 sections, like a lesson and then a project, okay? And so the project that accompanies this particular lesson is appliquing a lampshade.
Oh, wow.
With some, let me take it out of the thing so it doesn't glare so bad. And it's freestanding appliques that were done like on organza or something like that.
Yeah.
And then stitched or glued onto the lampshade. And the lady used some floral designs that are built into the machine.
Yeah.
That to me look kind of like an iris. You know, the petals on an iris.
Yes.
certainly you could use this kind of an idea for, you know, appliquing on a lot of stuff. You can even put the three-dimensional freestanding appliques on clothes or pillows or curtains or whatever. People even use smaller ones to do like hair bows and so forth. So that's our, she goes into a lot of information about covering the lampshade and using the binder attachment to make the binding that goes on the top and the bottom edges of the lampshade. So that's our project for today, and I really don't think you would make a lampshade. Okay. Since we're not sewing things out, I was just going to show you what I have in mind for our technique class in June, if you're interested. And I have not given Carol the information yet because I just decided on this yesterday. But it's a wall hanging and it's appliqued, but it's got a little bit of, I don't know what to call it. Now let me just show you a picture, okay? This is the picture of it. It's got applique cupcakes on it. And this is a project from Viking from ages ago when the machine that it was created for was not an embroidery machine. So this was all done manually. And they would applique the top part of the cupcake down. And then from the back side of the fabric, put a slit in there and then stuff some batting or fiberfill or something in there so that the icing on the cupcake was puffy. And then so that little slit closed and then come back in and do some stitching on top of the icing to almost like quilting to make it look like it really was icing. And I thought it was a cute idea. The other picture that's here is of this lady hanging hers in her house. And I decided that it would be a lot easier and a lot more fun if we did our cupcakes in embroidery. So I did some digitizing and I did my first stitch out on them. So, and they're good size.
They're adorable.
That's one. And I decided to make 3 different styles instead of just one. So this is,
Of course you did.
Was in the project. And then I made this one and this one. So there will be 3 different styles, if you will. And besides making these very big ones, I'm going to also make ones that are about this big.
So how big are those?
Those are, good question, Elizabeth. I'll tell you in a sec.
Okay.
It's okay, that's a 6-inch ruler. So they're just a little bit wider than 6 inches and about the same high. All right. And you will be getting also a layout if you were interested in making the wall hanging with the dimensions and stuff on it. So we'll be working on that in our tech class. So in addition to just putting the fabric down at the top, you will be putting a layer of like fusible batting underneath it.
So did you just use, fusible fleece?
Yes, I did. And I haven't fused it yet. But I did these, like I said, these were just my first stitch outs last night. And I went in this morning and did some tweaking. And we'll try again. One thing I did do was to make the satin stitch wider here so it covers more, and also on the bottoms. And I guess I'm hung up kind of on the black and white stuff since that quilt I just finished, which Barbara knows nothing about. FOF has every year FOF does a block of the month quilt. And the one for this year, Carol and I are making, mine is finished, making the quilts to, as an example, and then we're going to have classes.
Oh, wow.
This
Oh, cool.
Very cool.
This is the quilt,
Wow.
and that's the back.
Oh my gosh.
But
Those
the back is
Photos don't do it justice.
the back is something I decided to do, so I figured that out. But the quilt itself it's way fun, and we are going to adapt it, if you will, so Viking users can also make it. So if something like that interests you, you can pick your own colors and your own fabrics.
Wow.
And if you're interested, you can talk to Carol, sign up for it. Are you in Colorado now?
I am not. We were in Texas, and then we've recently moved to Florida as our permanent home. And then the plan is to spend kind of from May to October in Colorado, and then October to May in Florida. But this year is a little bit different because we're just transitioning and moving and all of that. So we'll be in Colorado for a couple of weeks, and then probably just for August and September of this year. Just because we're trying to get settled and we've got construction going on and that kind of thing. And, having, my in-laws are, they need a little bit of attention. So anyway, we're on the slow boat here.
That's okay. Well, because I think the intention is to have the quilt classes as hybrid, which means that they are in person and virtual at the same time. So if you're interested, investigate it.
Yeah. And is the quilt from the picture, is it a pieced quilt, or are they using, I know that the FOF machine has a lot of the fancy like braiding kind of stitches where you're using ribbon and that kind of thing.
It's pieced. It's totally sewing. It is no embroidery.
Okay.
And she's bearing the lead that this is how to use feet. So it's about feet too. So it's really, I feel like I'm gonna, just because of all the feet.
Yeah, that's very good, because I got material and some of the information to do a Husqvarna Viking feet quilt at the place in Texas where I went. So I got some of the materials and I bought a boatload of feet and I was ready to get going on this. And then the pandemic happened. And so there were no in-person things going on. So I didn't realize it was using the different feet. And if it's hybrid, I'm definitely interested. Not that I don't have about 6 quilts already in progress, and none finished.
Well, this one is not large.
Good.
Because before I put my backing on, it was 40 by 60, and it has come down from that. So it's not a large quilt, It does take time, and it does use some of the FOF exclusive stitches. However, I've figured out how to do some of them on the Applique, and we'll be teaching you that.
Great.
So
Good.
Carol and I will be team teaching.
So is that a block of the month or just
Yes,
a
it's
general class?
considered a block of the month, yes, and we will have 2 classes a month on it, and they will be, virtually the same class, but, whatever step you're on is what will, come to class and will help you. So, the information is available. The book is very detailed. It's very, very good. It's, I don't know, 100 and some odd pages, and Carol is having it printed for you, and the cost of the book will also be your registration fee for the class. So if you're interested in that.
When are you starting it?
In June.
Okay.
And the classes will be on Friday and on Saturday. So people that work can come on Saturdays. And there's a list of dates, which I have, but also you can get from the store because, and you don't, you don't have to have everything figured out before. I'm sorry, Brenda, I interrupted you.
Is this already on the calendar? June, July, August type stuff?
I don't know. I know that they settled on the dates and they, locked them in. So as soon as Karen can, she'll get them on the calendar. And it's called Mystical Whimsy. And I don't know whether they put it on the calendar as that or as FOF block of the month.
Oh.
Let's see. Okay, the first
It's listed
class
as,
is June the 17th on a Friday.
it's after the software class or before the software class.
It's okay. It's before the software class. She did that on purpose so that people could come to the quilt class and then stay for the software class in-house. Okay, and then the other one is usually going to be the first Saturday of the month after the regular block of the month class, or Saturday Samplers, the official name for it. So, any questions on that? Okay. Well,
Does she know that the registration's not open on those?
oh, Barbara?
Somebody at the store. Oh, the Saturday one's not open. Sorry.
Oh, the Saturday Sampler?
Yeah, on that Saturday, July 2nd or July, whatever that is, July 2nd, the registration's not open on it.
Okay, I don't know, but you certainly can call the store and talk to them about it. Not today, because they're not open. So the workbook class will always stay virtual. Other classes, some of them will be moving to in-house. Okay? But since the store's not open on Tuesdays, we're going to keep doing workbook classes virtual.
That's good for me.
Yes, we have another lady in Florida who is a FOF lady. So she is in our tech classes, she's in our software classes, and she's in the FOF workbook class. So we're glad to have you wherever you are, Barbara.
Are you in Florida?
We're just off of the Fort Myers. It's a place called Sanibel, Florida.
Yeah.
So it's nice. And when we're in Colorado, we're in Breckenridge. So I'm going to have to get a little more proficient on I-70 to get to you guys. It's a little bit intimidating coming from relatively flat Texas, making that drive into Denver or thereabouts. Anyway.
You can do it.
It's not me I'm worried about. It's everyone else that's driving like maniacs around me.
Yes. Then there's a lot of those. Okay, so anything else I can help you with today? Any questions about what we covered? Either the intended class, the extra stuff, the quilt, whatever?
Judy, I just have one question. The technique class where you're making the cupcakes, is that going to be in person or will that be a fusion as well?
The Monday class definitely will stay virtual. At some point, we will be moving the Friday class to in-house. So the Monday class will stay virtual.
Okay, and then this one, because it's on Tuesday, will be virtual too, the workbook.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
and
great.
At some point, the software class is moving to the store. I do not know whether she's going to have that a hybrid or not. I would suspect so because of people. Well, Carol Foss, who is on here, is in Arizona. So yeah, we will not abandon our remote users.
Well, and the software class really lends to remote, don't you think?
It does, in a way. It's always nice to be able, as an instructor, to be able to see people's faces because you can tell whether they're having problems or not, like just, their body language and their facial expressions. I mean, that's true with sewing as well as software.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's, so I appreciate when I can see people's faces and Brenda nods her head yes or no and shakes her head. Or just looks totally puzzled because I can see everybody, and it depends on how you've got your screen set for the meeting, whether you can see everybody or see who's talking or whatever. So I appreciate all of you being here. I hope you will take the opportunity to check out the different kinds of applique that are in our instruction. Just, if nothing else, to know how it's done, and that maybe somewhere along the line you'll say, oh, that would be great for this project.
It's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. And Lee, I think you hung in there the whole time.
No problems this time, so we'll see.
That's wonderful. So